The guy RFK Jr. put in charge of his autism solution wasn't just experimenting illegally on autistic kids, he was actually chemically castrating them. I was looking through the Maryland Medical Board's disciplinary documents, and they're not great. There were multiple cases brought to and decided on by the board, so I'm going to be reading from several of these documents. And just a reminder that we're talking about David Geier, the guy RFK Jr. tapped to basically solve autism, who's caught practicing medicine without a license, and former Dr. Mark Geier, his father, whose medical license was taken away. Number one is the case against David Geier, where he's accused of practicing without a license. And these findings actually reveal a lot of how they operated. The Geiers were found to have owned and operated several organizations, among those ASD Centers LLC. A snapshot of the website shows that they advertised as a place, quote, where medical solutions for autism can be found. Medical and solutions being interesting word choices, in my opinion. The website listed multiple locations, including several that suggested that ASD Centers LLC was either operating as genetic consultants of blank or there was some sort of partnership. It appears that Genetic Centers of America was former Dr. Mark Geier's clinical practice. Mark Geier, in one of the cases against him, by the way, was found to have falsely claimed that he was a board-certified epidemiologist and geneticist, when in reality, at most, he was a genetic counselor. So he was, in fact, not actually qualified to evaluate patients for genetic conditions, with absolutely zero expertise in autism. I do find their attempt to link their ASD practice to a genetics practice interesting, since they do claim that the cause is something else. However, it's not surprising when you consider that their proposed solution is, in fact, chemical castration. Oh, and by the way, David Geier never even went to medical school. He has a BA. I have a BA. Another interesting thing, they claimed to donate a significant portion of all their revenues to the Institute of Chronic Illnesses, Inc. and COMED, Inc., both of which they own, and just spread misinformation. The Geiers really tried to blur the lines on who was doing what. While he claims that he would just sit in the room while his dad was practicing the medicine, the board believed that he actually met with the patients and parents alone and discussed the course of treatment with them. They found that he was conducting some of the evaluations himself, clearly making impossible evaluations and statements that are inching them towards the diagnosis that they want to impose on this kid. They also scored the assessments, ordered tests, typed medical documents. Also, in some places where Mark Geier had supposedly signed documents, apparently the D in doctor had an uncanny resemblance to the D in David Geier when he signed. Even if David Geier's claims are true and he never actually did any of the doctoring, it's clear that this practice was a team effort. And I want you to keep that in mind because that means that according to his own words, he was often in the room when his father did what he did. Things that the Maryland board found that Dr. Mark Geier did are frankly disgusting. I can only give you a summary, but trust me when I say that if you look at the details of each individual case, it feels a lot like abuse. The board essentially evaluated 9 specific patient cases. The children were subjected to treatment in 7 of the 9 cases that were reviewed. In 2005, the dynamic duo published an article making claims that were summarily rejected by actual science. Despite the rejection of their claims and findings because of their methodology and completely non-transparent methods, they decided to develop a treatment protocol based on their own debunked claims that included Lupron, administered with daily subcutaneous injections, usually by a parent, and bi-weekly intramuscular ones that they got to give. They also used a sham review board, members of which were the dynamic duo and Mama Geier, which doesn't even meet the requirement of 5 members, let alone avoid the conflict of interest. Essentially, the pattern is this. A child who is diagnosed with autism by real medical professionals is brought into their practice by a parent who wants their autism, quote unquote, treated. The lack of credentials is not made clear. They are quote unquote evaluated and then purposefully misdiagnosed, usually with some combination of an unspecified developmental delay, heavy metal exposure, and possible precocious puberty. Lupron is a hormonal suppressant. It is used to treat many things, including slowing down prostate cancer, endometriosis, and uterine fibroids. I've also seen it used for menopause. One medically accepted use for it is to treat precocious puberty in children. There are clear diagnostic criteria and tests required for a diagnosis of precocious puberty. It's also used for chemical castration. It is not approved for the treatment of autism. In addition to that, it also, as mentioned, has a bunch of nasty side effects. Among other things, it's not recommended for people with seizure disorders. Autistic children are prone to seizures. Another treatment they subjected their victims to was chelation. Chelation is meant to remove heavy metals from the body, which can also lead to fatal side effects. And he just so happened to prescribe rectal suppositories that are not FDA approved. Now here's the thing, when I say he experimented on these children, I'm actually being generous, because even someone conducting problematic and unapproved research would, you assume, document their results in some sort of reasonable way. After all, you can't prove anything with your research if you don't have the results to back it up. But not only did they often fail to conduct initial evaluations or properly record examinations, he would sometimes start treatment without any information about a patient's physical condition. In multiple cases, patients were subjected to treatments that he never physically examined. That is not experimenting with chemical castration. That is just straight up chemical castration. And those that he did examine, he either didn't examine them adequately or give them the correct tests. And for those who were partially tested, all but one didn't meet the criteria for even his profile for Lupron therapy, which again is not even an accepted profile. Oh, and it doesn't appear that they forgot to closely examine their bodies, if you catch my drift, despite not recording the medically relevant data from these examinations. Just things like a general observation on size. He did the same for collation, prescribing it unnecessarily and lying to the parents in their consent forms. With the lack of information gathering, he also had no way of knowing whether the treatment was effective or not. It almost seems like he didn't care if the patients got better or not. He just really enjoyed injecting them and forcing suppositories into them. His diagnoses were false. The frequent blood tests he ordered were often unnecessary, and the necessary tests were never performed at all. We only know about these cases because of the scant medical records that the board was able to obtain. And by the way, their victims, these autistic children, were 9 years old, 6, 10, 3, 9, 7, 8, 8, 9.5. Which, by the way, means that many of them were at an age where they could not be diagnosed with precocious puberty. And they were anyway. So, in summary, the man who is now in charge of solving autism and is creating a registry of every autistic person in the United States has a history of torturing and chemically castrating autistic children for, as far as I can tell, fun.